Well, it's a pleasure to welcome to Radio Enfield today Lord Graham of Edmonton, who's joining us here at the Radio Enfield studio. So hello to you, Ted. I think you're known as Lord Ted of Ed, is that right?
Well, what's happened is various people say to me, how should we address you? Is it Lord Graham? Is it Lord Thomas Graham? And I said on one occasion, just call me Lord Ted of Ed.
Right.
And it stuck.
Right, now, looking back on your political career, I think you first joined Enfield Borough Council, the old Enfield Borough Council, back in 1961. You were leader of the old and the new council for 5 years, MP for Edmonton from 1974 to 1983, and then you were given a life peerage as Baron Graham of Edmonton, during which time you served as Labour Chief Whip from 1990 to 1997.
Correct.
So perhaps I can start by asking you, what gave you this strong socialist sort of background? I was looking at your book, which we'll give a plug for, From Tyne to Thames via the usual channels. And it kind of suggests that your views really came from your childhood.
Yes, I was born in 1925, and anyone who lived on Tyneside, or really in a large industrial town in the 20s and 30s, in my view, were well on the way to becoming a socialist, because the conditions of the times were such that good, honest people were in dire straits. But I'll tell you the illustration I use. I was in class when I was 9 or 10, and the door opened, and a policeman came in and he whispered to the teacher. And then the teacher said, right, Jody, Tommy, Teddy, Willie, on Tyneside you weren't called Ted, you were called Teddy.
Right.
You weren't called Bill, you were called Billy. And she said, out you go. And we all thought, what have we done wrong? When we got outside in the corridor, there was another 2 policemen with a big wicker basket. And the wicker basket was open, and inside were boots. They were from the Newcastle Police Boot Club, and they gave us a pair of boots. I went home and I said, Dad, look what I've got. I've got a pair of boots. His first thought, where did you pinch those? I said, Dad, I didn't pinch them. I said they were given to me by a policeman. I got a second clout round the ears. And I said it. Now, my dad was laughing, but my mum was crying. Years later, I said to my mum, Mum, remember when I brought those boots home? She said, yes. I said, why were you crying? And she said, because, she said, I knew the teacher had been asked to send out the 6 poorest boys in the class.
Right.
And I was ashamed that one of the poorest was her son. And I thought to myself, what kind of society is this? That an honest working class woman with 5 kids, with dad on the dole, made to cry, that helped to make me a socialist.
Because in those days, those were the days when the policeman would give you a clip round the ear if you'd done anything wrong, and that would be the end of the matter.
Well, I escaped a few clips because they never found out all of what I did.
So that made you a strong supporter of the cooperative movement. But what made you actually decide to go into politics as a career?
Well, bear in mind, I was starting to become politically aware during the war. I was 16, 17. I was called up for the Royal Marines when I was 18. And politics, or the future of Britain. If you remember, my home in Newcastle was bombed. There was an incendiary bomb dropped into the attic. I had to get that out with a shovel and some sand. I pay homage to the people who are declared every day having died. But you'd pick up the local newspaper in those days, and there were page after page. There were hundreds and sometimes many hundreds of people reported dead. So the appreciation of what politics meant came to me at an early age. The co-op, well, my mum said to me one day, Ted, I've got a job, I'm going to go for the co-op. I said, why the co-op, Mum? Well, she said, I'm 14, by the way, she said, when you're 65, you get a pension. And it didn't strike me as a good reason. But she said, they also got a sports field at Cowgate, and I loved sport. So that's when I started, and that led me to being a good cooperator.
Right. And, of course, you've got strong links with Edmonton. How has Edmonton changed over the years that you've been associated with it?
Well, every place has changed. I know Edmonton practically. I came to live in Enfield in 1952. So I've had more than 50 years knowledge. And the old Edmonton Green, along the highway was a feature. The 1952, just after the war, things weren't very easy, but Edmonton is the poorest part of the borough. 3 parts, Southgate, Enfield and Edmonton. Edmonton is the poorest. Some of the poorest wards in the country are around Edmonton Green. So it was my kind of territory. I love people. I love to hear their problems. I love to try to find solutions for them, some of which I did, some of which I didn't.
I think there's quite a lot of nostalgia for the old Edmonton of the 1960s, which I can just about remember with all the stalls along the high road there.
Well, nostalgia is a good therapy, because if you have good memories of when you were young or where you were, it doesn't do you any harm. But every place has changed. Enfield has changed. I mean, I remember when I came to Enfield, Sainsbury's had a shop in Church Street. People say to me they never did. I said, oh yes, one of the old-fashioned shops where they used to send the change round in a machine. It went round there. So every place has changed. Look at Pearson's, it's changed. Look at the Church Street, it's changed.
It was about 30 years ago to the day that you paid a visit to Radio Enfield in October 1979. I don't know if you remember that, but at that time broadcasting of Parliament had only just started. And even then it was only in sound. We didn't have pictures coming on the television. But we actually spoke about broadcasting from Parliament, and I asked you whether perhaps some of the surprise that people were expressing where they were listening to all the jeering and the heckling that was going on, whether this was normal. And this is what you said at the time.
I think a lot of people have been appalled at the kind of yarboo politics which they get as soon as Mrs. Thatcher or Jim Callaghan gets to their feet. They only get a stride or two, and then they're not just interrupted, but they're shouted down. But this is how it has been for the last 200 years. What the public are now hearing is how it's been for the past 200 years. If in fact you say it ought to stop, and quite frankly, it needs an awful lot of self-discipline.
So in some ways it's just a bit of tradition, really, that you're just carrying on.
Yes, it is tradition. And I'm a great admirer of tradition. I think that it's sensible. But there are times when I despair of my colleagues, and I'm sorry to say I'm probably in the middle of them shouting for my side.
Well, a bit of water's flowed under the bridge since we did that interview 30 years ago. Looking back, how do you feel that Parliament has changed since we've had broadcasting?
That particular aspect of parliamentary life has not changed very much, because after each Parliament it's renewed by new members who suddenly find themselves in the centre of the nation's interest. And of course, bear in mind, every member of Parliament is a partisan. He's there because he was put there by his political party. As a consequence, he has an obligation. If in fact his leader is doing well, he shouts, more, more, and the other side are glum. And when the other side are shouting at your leader, you shout back in defiance. So, on the whole, I approve of the atmosphere in the House, but I don't approve, of course, of being rude or being silly or stupid.
Right. And can I ask you, when you're at home, do you switch on the BBC Parliament channel and have a look at what's been going on?
No, these days, one of the developments over the years, I sit in my office, 12 o'clock on a Wednesday is Prime Minister's Question Time. I'll listen to that. And whenever there's a big debate, the Chancellor introduces his budget, I think of that. But also, I can walk along to the Commons and hear the debates, and go down to the Chamber in the Lords and hear the debates. So I enjoy watching the performance on television, but I'm not too bitten by it.
It's perhaps nice to get away from it once you get home and
yes,
be able to switch
yes.
off. Do you think the House of Lords gets adequate coverage in the media? Obviously, most of the attention is on the Commons, but...
Well, this is how it works. When the government is Labour, then the House of Lords assumes an influential position that it didn't have before, because the Conservatives and their friends still call the shots in the Lords. People don't realise, after the cull of the hereditaries, there are 700 members of the House of Lords, but only 200 of them are Labour. Now, which assembly in the world has a government which only has 2/7 of the people. So the remarkable thing is that the Labour government, with a hostile House of Lords, gets what it does. And it does because at the end of the day, if in actual fact the unelected Lords were actually thwarting the will of the elected Commons, that would be a major constitutional crisis.
Right. Do you think that there is a need to perhaps reform or change the House of Lords?
I was firmly of the belief that the House of Lords should be reformed. When I was agitating as a young man, I firmly believed we should abolish the House of Lords, not realising, of course, that if you abolish it, something's got to go in its place. Well, the something that's got to go in its place is a reformed House of Lords. We need a second chamber, but I'm also in favour of a wholly elected second chamber. I'm not in favour of appointments. I was appointed by Michael Foot, endorsed by Margaret Thatcher, but I believe the people of the country should elect the second house.
Right. Obviously, the atmosphere in the House of Lords is a lot more relaxed and perhaps a bit more gentlemanly than in the Commons. But
well, I'll tell you what I say on that. I say about the House of Lords, by comparison to the Commons, we get a better class of yobbo in the House of Lords.
Right.
Because members of the House of Lords, many of them come from the Commons. Many of them, of course, come from academia. And, I mean, the great thing about the House, you see Melvyn Bragg and David Putnam, you see Ruth Rendell, P.D. James, personalities who are political animals, but they've been put in there because of their service to the nation one way or another. So the House of Lords is different, and I believe it should remain different by the changes.
And of course you've just had Alan Sugar join you as well. And
Yes. Well, as far as I'm concerned, the great debt I have to Alan Sugar is on my ruby wedding birthday, after 40 years marriage, my wife bought me an Amstrad 9512, a little computer, and it still goes. It goes strong. So I say thank you, Sir Alan. More grist to your elbow.
Right, well, we'll come back to talk about the House of Lords a bit more later on, but I was just going to ask you whether you liaise with our local MPs. I think we've seen 2 of our 3 local MPs up at Radio Enfield recently.
I'm very happy to do that. I knew David Burrows well before he became a member, because he was the parliamentary, he was the candidate. Andy Love, of course, Andy, all 3 MPs, in my view, are doing a first-class job for their constituents. Not many people realise just how difficult the job is, because you can be started at 8 in the morning, you can be going on until 12 at night. Not many people. Let me give you an illustration. Someone would ring me up and say, Ted, I need your help. I would say, right, I'll call and see you on my way home tonight. What time will that be? About 11:30. Oh, I'm in bed. All right, I'll call on my way up to the house. What time will that be? It'll be about 7:30 or 8. Oh, I won't be up then. People have got a distorted view of the availability of the Member of Parliament.
And I think even now the House is adjourned until I think it's probably the beginning of October. Obviously, the MPs are still working in their constituencies and attending to other business as well.
What happened, David, is many people get things to do in February and March, and they say, I'll leave that. Typically, this broadcast, you said to me, when can you come? And I said, I'll be free the first Monday after the recess, which is today.
Right.
So that I'm here today. I've been to my local hospital to give blood. On Wednesday, I'm going up to the House to do a broadcast for John Waite in the Face the Facts programme. One of my interests in Parliament is I'm the secretary of a body called the All-Party Group for Mobile Homes. Used to call them caravans, now mobile homes. I'm going up there. On Friday I'm going up as well. So, of course, MPs are entitled to a holiday, and they do work hard.